If you're into ghost stories based on real accounts, this video is going to hook you from start to finish. Each case here involves encounters with spirits that, years later, still haunt those who lived through them, and those who just hear about them. Like in the next story you're about to see, where a boy spots a figure standing in the fog, a red-headed kid in a trench coat and one of those old-school propeller hats. The thing is, he wasn't the only one who saw it, and what seemed like pure imagination turned into a mystery no one's been able to explain to this day. But before we jump in, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any terrifying stories, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I grew up hearing stories from Maine, not the summer ones with lakes and picnics, but the other kind. The ones my dad would tell in a hushed voice when the night was heavy and the wind rattled the windows. Stories that stuck to your skin, you know? And one of them, well, that one never left my mind. My dad was a kid in the 70s, living in an old house in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees so tall they seemed to want to swallow the sky. The house was one of those with dark corners, creaking wood, and a damp smell that never went away. And of course, there were the strange happenings. Glasses falling off the table for no reason, footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, that feeling of being watched even in the shower. But back then, my dad was just a kid. He even liked those things, until the night the boy appeared. It was on a cold, early morning, the kind where silence seems to stick to your ears. My dad couldn't sleep. Something kept him alert, as if the air was charged with something. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, until he heard a noise outside, a slow dragging of feet on the wet ground. In his mind, it was a moose or a raccoon. Maine had those nighttime visitors. But then, there was a sound that wasn't from an animal. It was laughter, soft, almost musical. He got up, peeked out the bedroom window, and his heart froze. In the mist rising from the ground, standing in the middle of the yard, was a boy. Red-haired, pale skin like sour milk, wearing an old overcoat and, the most absurd detail, a toy propeller hat, spinning slowly in the wind. The boy looked straight at him and smiled. Not a child's smile. It was too wide, full of teeth that seemed sharp in the dim light. Then he waved as if to say, "You knew I was coming," and vanished. Not ran, not turned his back, just disappeared as if the mist had swallowed him. My dad was paralyzed. He convinced himself he had imagined it. After all, kids see things, right? The sleep, the darkness, the loneliness of that house. Everything could play tricks. He even tried to laugh it off the next day, but the laugh came out dry. And then, 3 days later, he told his best friend, Mike, in one of those school conversations where everything turns into a joke. But Mike didn't laugh. The blood drained from his face, and before my dad could ask what was wrong, Mike ran straight to his dad's house. When he returned, Mike was as white as paper. "I saw him too," he said, his voice breaking. "The boy with the propeller hat, at the edge of the forest last week, he called me to go with him. And then my dad understood that it wasn't just in his head. Someone else had seen it. Someone else knew. And worse, that boy wasn't just an apparition. He wanted something. But what? Mike didn't want to talk about the boy anymore. It was clear in the way he avoided the subject, biting his lips and looking at the ground every time someone mentioned it. But my dad insisted, after all, if they both had seen the same thing, it wasn't a coincidence. It was real, and real things in Maine had a way of coming back. It was on a rainy afternoon, with the gray sky clinging to the trees, that Mike finally gave in. They were in the shed behind the school, away from the others, when he blurted out, "He wasn't just a ghost, man. He called me by name." His voice was so low it almost disappeared in the sound of the rain. Whispered, like, as if he was inside my head. "Come play," he said. And I felt... Mike stopped, swallowed hard. I felt that if I went, I wouldn't come back. My dad felt that cold chill down his spine that you can't ignore, because he had felt something that night too, something that wasn't fear. It was attraction, as if a part of him wanted to follow that boy, step into the mist, and find out what was on the other side. And now Mike confirmed it. That thing wanted them. The following days were tense. My dad started hearing things, whispers in the wind, giggles when no one else was around. And the worst? The propeller hat. He swore he saw that thing spinning in the middle of the forest, even with no one wearing it. Mike was worse. He stopped sleeping, got dark circles under his eyes, jumping at every noise. Until one night he disappeared. It wasn't a normal disappearance. Mike's mom found his bed empty, the window open, and, on the dirt ground of the yard, small footprints like a child's heading towards the forest. But there was one detail. The footprints didn't come back. It was as if Mike had gone and evaporated. The whole town searched the woods, even called the county hunters. Nothing. Until, on the third day of searching, my dad found something buried near a stream. The propeller hat, dirty with mud, but intact. And when he picked it up, he heard the laughter again, this time inside his own head. "You're next." He threw the hat away and ran until he couldn't anymore. But it was too late, because now he knew the boy hadn't just taken Mike. He had chosen Mike. And my dad, well, he was on the list. Now what happened when he finally faced the mist and what was on the other side? That, I'll tell you later. Because this part, no one is prepared to hear it. My dad knew he couldn't run forever. The boy with the propeller hat wasn't the type to give up. He was patient, as if he had played this game before. And after Mike disappeared, my dad felt it. He was next. The house became unbearable. The noises increased. Scratches on the walls, voices whispering his name in the middle of the night. Until one moonless night he woke up with the room freezing. The window was open and outside, the mist, dense, sticky, as if it had come to him. And in the middle of it, the figure of the boy. This time, not smiling. This time, with a finger in front of his lips as if to say, "No more waiting." My dad didn't think. He jumped out of bed, ran to his parents' room, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if the whole house breathed against him, and then he heard it. The sound of the propeller hat spinning, each click louder, closer. It came from the hallway. He hid in the closet, covered his mouth to keep from screaming, and then silence. Until something scratched the door. Slowly. "You promised to play." The voice wasn't the boy's, it was Mike's, but distorted, as if he had swallowed something hot. "Now he wants you too." My dad couldn't take it. He punched the closet door, ran straight into the forest. I don't know if it was courage or desperation, but he followed the footprints, the same ones as Mike's, to a clearing where the mist formed a perfect circle. And in the center, the propeller hat, still on the ground as if waiting. That's when he saw. Inside the mist, figures, dozens, children, all with the same hats, all looking at him with empty eyes. And behind them, the red-haired boy, now with a deformed face, his mouth opening wider than it should. "Finally," he said and reached out his hand. My dad never knew how he managed to escape. He only remembers waking up in the hospital with his parents crying. They said they found him unconscious by the roadside, with a fever of 104 degrees and his hands full of dirt, as if he had dug his way out of somewhere. Mike? He never appeared. But sometimes when the mist descends in Maine, my dad still hears the sound. Click, click, click. And he knows. The boy is still there, waiting. And this time he won't take a no for an answer. What a horror. What did you think of the story? What rating from 0 to 10 would you give it? Leave your opinion here in the comments. Seeing a child standing in the dark out of nowhere is already frightening. Now imagine when there are several, and only one person can see them. The story you're about to see next involves a girl who sees much more than she should in a cemetery. They're there, the sad children. That's what my daughter, little Lily, said from the back seat of the car as we drove past the old Willow Creek Cemetery. I nearly lost my breath. Not because she said something scary. Kids have imaginations, I know. But because of the way she said it. A voice so calm, so certain, as if she were pointing out a flock of birds in a tree. My boyfriend Daniel hit the brakes before I could even ask. The car came to a sudden stop, and that heavy silence fell over us. Not even the radio played anymore. He looked at me and I saw in his eyes the same question that was running through my mind. Did she really see something? Turning around, I forced myself to keep my voice steady. Lily, what children, sweetheart? She didn't even hesitate. She pointed straight at the cemetery gate where the evening mist curled around the old tombstones. There, 3 of them. They're looking at us. My blood ran cold. There was no one there. At least, no one we could see. Daniel opened the door and got out of the car, as if he wanted to check with his own eyes. I followed, but my legs were trembling. The wind cut through us and I swear I heard a whisper. Not words, just something. Lily stayed in the back seat, pressed against the window, her little eyes fixed on a point I couldn't see. Lily, I called again, trying not to sound scared. What do they look like? She turned to me, and for the first time I noticed a shadow of concern on her little face. They're wearing old clothes, Mommy, and they're crying. Crying, that word hit me like a punch because it wasn't just a game. Lily never lied about things like this. Daniel came back, pale. There's no one there, he murmured, but I could see he was doubting even his own vision. We looked back at the cemetery and I felt it. I didn't see, I didn't hear, but I felt it. Someone or something was watching us. That chill that runs up your spine when you know you're not alone, even if you can't explain it. They want help, Lily said simply, as if it were obvious. And then my heart tightened, because if there was one thing worse than ghosts, it was sad ghosts. Children, trapped there, crying with no one to listen. Daniel suggested we leave. He said it was just imagination, that Lily must have seen shadows, the reflection of the moon. But when I got into the car and looked in the rearview mirror, I swear by everything sacred. For a second, I saw it too. 3 small figures near the gate, and then they vanished. Lily was still looking back as we sped away. They're still there, she whispered, and I knew deep in my soul that we weren't going to forget that night anytime soon. Mommy, they're following us. Lily's voice came softly, almost a whisper, but each word fell like a brick on my chest. My reflex was to look in the rear-view mirror again, but the road behind us was empty, at least to my eyes. Daniel gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. We better get home, he said, and this time, I didn't argue. The rest of the drive was tense. The silence in the car was heavy, only broken by Lily's calm breathing, which now seemed distant, as if she were listening to something we couldn't hear. Every now and then she turned her head back as if someone had called her name. Each time she did that, my heart raced. When we got home, the feeling of something wrong didn't disappear. On the contrary, the air inside the apartment felt colder than it should have, even with the heat on. Lily went straight to her room without even complaining about bedtime, which for a 6-year-old is mighty strange. Daniel tried to downplay it. She must have seen some shadows, or maybe some real kids playing there and we didn't see them right because of the fog. But his tone was uncertain. We looked at each other, and I knew he wasn't convinced either. I went to check on Lily before going to bed. She was sitting on her bed, staring at the wall as if she saw something through it. Lily, is everything okay? I asked, sitting beside her. She turned to me, and her eyes... God, her eyes looked older at that moment. They're here now, she said. But they're not crying anymore, they're just looking. My blood turned to ice. Here, inside our house. I looked around, searching for any sign, a figure, a breath of cold air, anything. But the room seemed normal. But the pressure in the air, that feeling of being watched, I couldn't ignore it. What do they want, Lily? My voice came out more shaky than I wanted. She shrugged. I don't know, but one of them showed me something. Showed? My stomach twisted. Showed what, sweetheart? Lily looked at her hand as if holding something invisible. A doll. She said she lost it. That hit me in a way I didn't expect. A doll. Something so simple, so childish, and at the same time, so sad. Because if these children were ghosts, what had happened to them? Why were they still trapped here? That night I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house, a creak in the floor, The wind hitting the window made me jump. Daniel eventually fell asleep, but I stayed there staring at the ceiling, with the feeling that someone was in the hallway, waiting, and worse. I could almost hear their crying. "Mommy, they want us to go there." Lily appeared beside me in bed, in the middle of the night, waking me with a start. She had wide eyes, but she didn't seem scared, just determined. My heart was beating so hard I could barely breathe. "Go where, sweetheart?" I asked, knowing full well the answer before she even pointed in the direction of the window. "There, to their place, the cemetery." Daniel woke up with the noise and tried to calm the situation, but Lily didn't back down. "They're crying again," she insisted. "The girl with the doll said we have to help." I looked at Daniel, and I saw in him the same doubt I felt. What if it was real? What if it wasn't just imagination? That thought haunted me. But what could we do? Call a priest? Flee the town? It was Lily who decided for us. She took her favorite doll, a worn-out old rag doll, and held it against her chest. "We'll take it to her," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And that's how, before dawn, we went back to the cemetery. The gate creaked as we entered, and the air grew heavy, as if we were walking through water. Lily held my hand tightly, but she didn't tremble. She knew where she was going. And then, among the old tombstones, she stopped. "It's here." There was nothing special about that place, just a small headstone, almost hidden by the tall grass. But as I approached, I could read the name, Emily Carter, 1912 and 1918, 6 years old, the same age as Lily. My legs weakened. Lily knelt and placed the doll on the ground in front of the headstone. "There," she whispered. "Now you can play again." And then, the wind stopped. The silence was so absolute that I could hear my own heartbeat. And for an instant, I saw 3 small figures fading into the air like smoke. The one in the middle, a little girl in a tattered dress, looked at Lily and smiled. Then, they vanished. Lily stood up as if nothing had happened. "They're gone," she said simply. Daniel and I stood there motionless, not knowing what to say. But one thing I knew. That place would never be just a cemetery to me again, and somehow, I knew they were finally at peace. But as we returned to the car, I swear I heard very softly the sound of children's laughter coming from behind the tombstones. And this time, they weren't sad. Creepy, huh? It's always unsettling when a child perceives presences that no one else sees. In the next story, it's not a child who sees the unexplained, but a firefighter in the middle of a rescue mission who encounters someone who shouldn't be there. The first time I saw him was in the middle of the smoke, just standing there as if the fire was nothing. And the worst part? No one else seemed to notice. I was the rookie at that old fire station, the kind that smells of aged wood and has whispered stories in the hallways. We used to joke that the place was haunted, but it was all just banter, you know? Until that day. The alarm blared in the middle of the night, that shrill sound cutting through sleep like a knife. A fire in an abandoned building downtown. The chief shouted orders, the team moved fast, and I, still green, was tasked with helping control the crowd along with another junior, Mike. We arrived at the scene, and chaos was already in full swing. Screams, sirens, the building spewing black smoke against the dark sky. The interior crew was already going in with the hoses, and Mike and I stayed at the front line, holding back the curious onlookers. That's when I looked toward the front of the building and saw him, a firefighter, complete with uniform, helmet, everything. But something about him was off. He didn't move like we did. While everyone else was running, shouting, he just stood there, arms crossed, looking at the fire as if he were watching a movie. His posture was too calm, too controlled, as if the hell there was just routine. I turned to Mike and asked, "Who is that guy?" He looked at me like I was crazy and said, "What guy?" I squinted, looked again. The firefighter was still there, but now he had turned his head, in my direction. My blood turned to ice. I'm not the type to panic, but at that moment, something inside me screamed that this wasn't normal. I called the chief, asked if there was someone else on the team I didn't know. He took a quick look and shook his head. "Just us, kid. Why?" I swallowed hard and looked again. The mysterious firefighter was still there, but now with the smoke swirling around him, I noticed something that almost made me collapse on the spot. His uniform wasn't new. It was old, the kind we hadn't used in years, and his face didn't burn. The fire was high, the heat could be felt meters away, but he seemed to feel nothing. He just kept staring at me with a heavy gaze, as if he knew something I didn't. That's when Mike nudged me. "Dude, you're as white as a sheet. You seeing things?" I opened my mouth to respond, but when I looked toward the front of the building again, he was gone. And the worst part? No one had seen anything. We finished the job, the fire was controlled, but I couldn't get that image out of my head. On the way back to the station, I felt watched, as if something was there, in the corners, keeping an eye on me. When I finally decided to ask the chief about that figure, he stopped in the middle of the hallway, looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, and said, "You weren't supposed to see that, kid." That's when he opened a drawer and pulled out a yellowed photo, and I almost fell backward. Because the man in that photo, it was him. The same face, the same uniform. But the photo had a date written on the back. 2002. And a single word that made my heart stop. Deceased. The chief held the photo with a trembling hand as if it might burn him. "This is Daniel Harris, one of the best we ever had. Died in 2002, lung cancer, after decades of fighting fires." I felt a chill run up my spine. So that was... Danny? Yeah. The chief closed his eyes for a second as if reliving some memory. He always said that if he ever passed, he'd come back to look after the rookies. We thought it was just old firefighter talk, but you're not the first to see him. That left me with a weird feeling. Half fear, half relief. If it was a ghost, at least it didn't seem to want to harm me. But still, why me? That night I went home exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that calm face staring at me in the middle of the fire. And worse, there was a presence in my room. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. A weight in the air, as if someone was there, standing in the darkest corner, just watching. The next day, the station was strange. The radio turned on by itself. Tools went missing and reappeared in places no one had left them. And once, God help me, I swear I heard low laughter coming from the basement, where the old equipment is kept. That's when Mike pulled me aside. "Dude, something's wrong here. Last night I swear I saw someone sitting in your chair, but there was no one there. He was pale, his eyes full of that fear you only see in civilians, never in firefighters." I didn't know what to say, until the chief called us for an emergency. Another fire, this time in a warehouse near the railroad. And guess what? He was there again. This time it wasn't just me who saw him. Mike almost tripped when he spotted him, standing in the middle of the smoke, motionless. "Is that him, right? The Danny guy?" I could only nod. But something was different. This time, the ghost didn't just watch. He pointed, straight to a part of the building we hadn't even seen yet. The chief shouted over the radio, "There's someone in there. Let's go now." We ran, following the direction Danny had indicated. And in the midst of the rubble, we found a child. Scared, but alive. If it weren't for that warning, they would have burned to death. When we got out, I looked back, searching for him. And there he was, Danny Harris, standing in the middle of the chaos with a calm smile. This time, he raised his hand, a discreet wave as if to say, "See, I take care of my own." And then, he simply disappeared. Not faded into the smoke, not turned to mist. He ceased to exist as if he had never been there. Since that day, I've never seen him again. But sometimes when the radio picks up strange static or when we enter a really bad fire, I feel it. He's still around. And now, I even hope he is. Creepy, right? A total stranger helped save lives and then vanished like he never existed. But what happens when the spirit doesn't leave? The next story shows what it's like to live with a presence that shows up every single day, like it's just part of the family. But before we get into that, if you've made it this far, it probably means you're enjoying the stories. So hit that like button to let YouTube know you want more content like this, and so you don't miss the next chilling tale. I bought that old house in the fall, when the leaves were already dropping and the wind whistled through the branches like someone telling a secret. The property was beautiful, with a garden that must have been lovely decades ago. But what really caught my attention was the basement. It wasn't just any basement, it was one of those that seemed to have been built not to store junk, but to hide things. The stairs creaked like a moan when I went down for the first time, and the smell of damp earth and rotting wood stuck in my nose. The light was dim, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling that swayed slightly, casting shadows that crawled along the stone walls. Spider webs covered the corners, and the air was so heavy I could almost feel it trickling down my throat. But the worst part wasn't what I saw, it was what I felt. From the first moment I had the impression that I wasn't alone down there. It was as if something was breathing with me, only slower, older. In the first few days I ignored it. Every old place has its noises, right? The creaking of the floor, the snap of the wood settling. But then the sounds started coming from places where there shouldn't have been anything. A dragging of feet in the darkest corner, a whisper so low it seemed to come from inside my own head. And the worst part? My dog, Duke, a German shepherd who would take on a bear for me, refused to go down those stairs. He would stay at the top, tail between his legs, growling at the darkness as if he saw something I couldn't. One night, after hearing a sound like someone scratching the wall, I decided to speak. I don't know why, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of sheer madness. "If there's someone there," I said, and my voice echoed in a way it shouldn't have, as if the walls were absorbing the words. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to live in peace." And then something responded, not with words. It was more like a feeling, a shift in the air. Suddenly, the heavy energy that always filled the basement seemed to calm down, as if whoever was there had heard and, who knows, maybe even understood. That's when I realized, maybe I wasn't dealing with a monster. Maybe it was just someone who still hadn't left. I started calling him Nate. Nathaniel, if we were being formal. I don't know where the name came from. It just seemed right. And strangely, things started to get better. Tools I had lost would appear on my workbench, as if they had been placed there on purpose. The musty smell faded, replaced by a faint aroma of cinnamon. And once, when I was fixing a shelf, I felt an invisible hand holding the wood for me, firm and gentle. Duke still won't go down there, but now, instead of growling, he just stands there, ears perked up, as if he's listening to a conversation I can't hear. And you know what? I'm not afraid anymore. Because if Nate is there, he didn't come to scare me. He came to stay. And somehow, that comforts me. After Nate and I came to this understanding, things changed. The basement was no longer that suffocating place that gave me the creeps. Now it was as if someone had opened an invisible window down there. The air became lighter, and even the light seemed less yellowed, less sickly. But that doesn't mean strange things didn't happen anymore. Quite the opposite. One afternoon I was looking for a wrench that had gone missing, again, when I heard a click right behind me. When I turned around, the tool was there, on top of an old wooden chest, as if it had been placed there on purpose. "Thanks, Nate," I said, half without thinking, and then, I swear by everything sacred, I heard a sigh. Not loud, not scary. Just a breath of air passing through a corner of the room, like a silent, "You're welcome." That's when I started noticing the patterns. Nate liked to help, but he also had his whims. If I left things lying around, they would disappear for a while. Sometimes they would turn up in high places, as if he were playing a prank on me. Once my hammer went missing for 3 days, until I found it hanging from a hook on the ceiling, completely out of my reach. When I asked politely, the next day it was back on the workbench. But not everything was games. One night I was almost asleep when I heard a noise coming from the basement. Not those random sounds from before, but 3 clear knocks, like someone knocking on wood. I went down the stairs slowly, not afraid, but with that little chill on the back of my neck you get when you know something important is about to happen. The basement door was ajar, and inside, it was dark. Darker than usual. The bulb had burned out, but in the middle of the darkness one thing caught my attention. A pale stain on the floor, near the tool shelf. When I got closer I saw it was a piece of paper, a yellowed old newspaper clipping. The ink was faded, but I could read the headline, "Accident on Hargrove Family Property Kills Young Carpenter." And below, a blurry photo of a smiling man, his features almost erased by time. My heart raced. Nate? Was it him? I picked up the paper with a slightly trembling hand, and that's when I felt it. A pressure on my shoulder. It wasn't a touch. It wasn't a push. It was as if the air had solidified there for a second, firm and comforting, and then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. The next morning, I researched the name Hargrove in the town records. I found out that the house had been built in the 1940s by a man named Elias Hargrove, and that his youngest son, Nathaniel, had died in an accident in the basement. A shelf collapse, according to the records. When I returned to the basement that night, I placed the newspaper clipping on a small altar I improvised with a wooden box. "I know who you are now," I said softly. The air stood still, as if the basement itself was holding its breath. "And you can stay here as long as you want." This time the answer was clear. The bulb flickered once, yes, and then returned to normal. And I smiled. Because Nate wasn't a ghost. He was a housemate. After I discovered who Nate really was, everything made sense. The way the tools organized themselves, the smell of fresh sawdust that sometimes appeared out of nowhere. He had been a carpenter, and now, even after death, he still kept the basement in order, as if it were his own workshop. But one night something changed. I was down there arranging some boxes when the air suddenly chilled. Not the usual basement cold, but something sharp, as if winter had invaded the house all at once. The walls began to creak, wood contracting as if something huge was moving within them. And then, I heard it. "Help!" It wasn't a whisper. It was a groan, hoarse and full of pain, coming from all corners at once. My skin prickled. Nate? I had never heard him speak, only feel. The light flickered violently, and in the midst of the chaos, I saw something that made me freeze. In the darkest corner, a tall and faded figure, like an old photo coming to life. Nate, but not the gentle Nate I knew. This one was hurt, with deep marks on his face and arms, his eyes full of a despair that hurt just to look at. He reached his hand toward me, and the entire basement trembled. Shelves fell, glasses broke, and in the middle of the turmoil, I understood. Nate wasn't trapped here by accident. Something was keeping him here. Something bad. It was as if the house had 2 layers. The one I saw and another, deeper one where Nate really was. The basement was just the door. "What do you want?" I shouted, holding onto a beam to keep from falling. The answer came as an icy breath in my ear. "Find me." And then silence. The light returned. The chaos stopped. On the floor near my feet, a floorboard was loose. When I pulled it, I saw something that wasn't in the town records. A rusted tool stained with something dark. The hammer that caused the accident. Only it hadn't been an accident. Nate didn't fall. He was pushed. I looked into the dark void under the floorboard and promised softly, "I'll get you out of here." And somewhere in the darkness, Nate smiled. The basement was never the same again. But now, finally, I knew what I had to do. How scary. What did you think of the story? What rating from 0 to 10 would you give it? Leave your opinion here in the comments. I'll never forget the first night in that house. The silence was heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin. We had just arrived, barely unpacked, and I could already feel that something there wasn't quite right. The cats, who usually loved exploring new corners, were on edge, meowing softly as if they were seeing something we couldn't. They refused to stay inside, preferring to be outside despite London's biting cold. At first, I even tried to find a logical explanation. Oh, it must be the stress of the move. Animals feel these things. But then the nights went by, and the strange happenings only increased. It was that feeling of being watched, you know? As if someone were right there, breathing down your neck. I would turn quickly and nothing. Just emptiness. But the air would turn icy, as if a draft had passed through, even with all the windows closed. And the footsteps. My God, the footsteps. Every night, around 3 in the morning, I would wake up to the clear sound of someone walking upstairs. Slow, dragging steps, as if the person were tired. The first time I thought it was my dad, but when I went up to see, there was no one. The hallway was dark, silent, as if the footsteps had vanished into thin air. Objects also started moving on their own. Small things at first. A glass I was sure I had left on the kitchen table would appear in the sink. A pen would disappear from my desk and be found on the floor, on the other side of the room. I tried to convince myself it was just lack of attention, but it wasn't. There was something wrong with that house. The last straw was the music. One night I was sleeping deeply when, out of nowhere, the computer in my room turned on by itself, playing loud, shrill music. I woke up startled, my heart beating like a drum. At that moment I felt an invisible hand pulling my arm, as if someone were trying to wake me urgently. Only later did I find out that, at that very moment, I was having a nightmare where I was drowning. If it weren't for the music, well, better not to think about it. But the worst was yet to come. One night I went downstairs to get a glass of water and saw him, an old, thin man in dark clothes lying on the stairs. He was there, staring fixedly at me with deep, empty eyes. I froze. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. We just stood there, staring at each other until, in the blink of an eye, he simply disappeared. The next day I told my parents everything. I expected them to laugh, to say it was just my imagination. But their look, they knew. My dad took a deep breath and finally admitted, "I've also heard things, and seen them." That's when we decided the house had to go. And so, within a few weeks, my parents sold the house and packed their bags for New Zealand. But before leaving, my dad did one last thing. He researched. And what he discovered about that place, well, that's a story for another time. Because to this day I wonder, did we really escape that house? Or did something come with us? My dad was never one to believe in supernatural things, but what he discovered about that house in London made even his hair stand on end. After we moved to New Zealand, he spent weeks digging through old records, talking to former residents, until he found something that explained everything. The house had been built on top of an old path, not just any path, but one of those routes that, according to local legends, were used to take the dead. Like a spiritual corridor, you know? And worse, before it was our house, the place had been an asylum. One of those really old ones from the 1800s, where people went to die away from society's eyes. My dad discovered accounts of patients who spoke of an old, thin man who appeared in the hallways at night. He wasn't a patient. No one knew where he came from. But when he appeared, someone always died the next day. The staff called him the Watchman, and it didn't stop there. One of our friends who had come over once sent me a message after we moved. "Dude, I never told you, but that night I was there. I swear I saw a woman in a white dress standing in your living room. I thought it was your mom, but when she turned, she had no face." I got goosebumps, because I remembered that night. My friend had suddenly gone pale and made up an excuse to leave early. At the time, I thought it was nonsense. Now, everything made sense. We discovered more stories. The former owner of the house had moved out in a hurry after his daughter started talking to a man in black that only she could see. A family before us had left after their baby woke up screaming in the middle of the night, pointing at the ceiling and saying, "He's watching." I always thought that when we moved, the nightmare had ended. But there's one thing that haunts me to this day. On the last night in that house, I swear I heard someone whisper in my ear, very softly, "You didn't escape." And since then, sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I still feel that cold, that heavy silence, as if something were just waiting for the right moment to show me that in the end, no house is ever truly abandoned. If you're still here, you've probably realized these stories aren't just about jump scares. They stick with you. If you like this kind of experience and want to hear more true supernatural encounters, hit that subscribe button. Drop a ghost emoji in the comments so I know you stayed with me till the end. And if the video gave you chills at any point, give it a like. That helps me keep bringing more stories that really mess with your mind. There's another video right here that goes even deeper into this theme. Click it, and let's dive into another round of stories you won't be able to forget.